In our dark story today, we learn just how challenging life can become in a split second. For two explorers, tragedy strikes, leaving one explorer faced with the gut-wrenching decision: should one life be sacrificed for another? And then, the second explorer is tested beyond his limits on the real meaning of the will to survive. Two friends, Joe Simpson and Simon Yates, shared a love for mountain climbing. They became the first explorers to scale the west face in the Peruvian Andes. But that adventure quickly went from being a moment of triumph to a living horror. When it was time to begin the descent, the two guys didn't realize there was way too much slack in the rope. So, as with all climbers, Simpson was using his axe to gain stability as he scaled from spot to spot. However, when he swung his axe into this one spot, the ice disintegrated instantly, and he plunged to an ice cliff and shattered his leg. Simon didn't realize what had happened and yelled out to see if he was all right. That's when Joe informed him that his leg was broken. This made Simon incohesive, as he had no idea what they would do to successfully make it down to the bottom. The one thing that made this massive accomplishment really work was that the two were equal partners, working together, as you find with most professional climbers. And then, to make matters worse, they both knew that a storm was bearing down, which forced them to continue this descent into the dark, separated on the rope, and with no way of communicating. The system that Joe and Simon used for this climb was a knot that joined both of their ropes together along with a friction device. The knot would move up as Joe was lowered, and then it would hit the friction device, which gave Simon the signal to unclip, take his weight off, move down, clip the other side, and then the process started over. Surprisingly, the two guys did make it most of the way down the mountain until they reached a protruding iced cliff in line with the rope that they couldn't see. The rope got stuck on this cliff and Simon couldn't re-clip around the knot. This made them deadlocked, hanging, and certain to eventually die. And now, the only choice Simon had was to cut Joe from the line, in order to save his own life. Basically, it was a choice to save one life by sacrificing another. Simon hung on for what seemed like a lifetime while he was contemplating what to do. But when he ran out of strength and hope, he had no choice but to send Joe free-falling to his death. Joe felt the grips of death until the unthinkable happened. Joe eventually fell through a crevasse and landed in a cavern of snow. He sustained even more bodily injuries but had not lost his life. And once Joe realized that he was still living, he spent several hours thinking about how he could end his own life, feeling sure that death would inevitably be his fate. But, at the same time, he also worried about how after dying and then being covered up by the snow, it would be impossible to locate and recover his body. So, he settled on waiting for daylight before taking his life. By the next morning, he was able to crawl out the crevasse and survey the surroundings. He miraculously found the courage and strength to force himself into survival mode. Joe crawled for 4 days to find help. During this trek, he lost so much blood and fluid that he almost lost his life again. And on the last day he crawled for 9 hours on what would have been a 10-minute walk. And in another miracle, he reached the campsite, shortly before Simon's departure. Both men thought the other had died, however, they both survived the whole ordeal. Joe said that he became extremely weak and frail, both physically and mentally. I felt like giving up, until my will to survive kept me going. He said that he continuously prayed and did everything possible to convince himself that he could make it back. That's what allowed him to survive. Joe was asked several times if he was angry that Simon cut him loose. He always replied, "I don't know what took him so long. There was no reason for both of us to die." Joe Simpson has since written a book called Touching the Void, and travels around the country giving motivational speeches. This is one of the greatest survival stories of all time.